Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today. So this is my first YouTube post as an ex-Jehovah's Witness. I'm hoping to help people who are looking to leave the organization or have left and are just looking for support, which is kind of the situation that I'm in. I want to share my story. So I want to give you all just like a brief give my brief story of how I became. Oh boy, I'm tongue tied here. My background as being a Jehovah's Witness, and then what woke me up and why I left the organization. So, yeah, so briefly, I grew up around Jehovah's Witnesses. So I was raised in a household where my single parent was a Jehovah's Witness. They became inactive when I was really young. But we have a large extended family. So yeah, I was raised by a single mom, and she has many siblings who are Jehovah's Witnesses, and I also have many cousins who are Jehovah's Witnesses. So it was always, um, the influence was always there. So growing up, even after my mom stopped going to meetings and participating, I still had many aunts, uncles, cousins who would, happily pick me up, take me to meetings. So that's kind of how, growing up, how I was always, I ended up going to a lot of being involved in the organization to a pretty high degree. And then, so fast forward, I became a young adult and I drew away for a while. I was, just busy working full time job and um, wasn't sure if it was for me. And then, so fast forward to 2021 years old, we moved, and so I was living at home, and we moved, and we about 40-minute drive away from where we had been living. So I was in a different congregation, a different territory, as Jehovah's Witnesses would say, uh, which is meant for going out in service. If you're going door to door, it's a way of like separating congregations, and one kingdom hall, which is what you would call church, Jehovah's Witnesses call a kingdom hall. So you go here to this kingdom hall if you live in that territory, and then if you're out in the door to door ministry, which Jehovah's Witnesses are known for, then that's where you go, your territory. So anyway, I fast forward. So this is like I said, I was about 20 years old when we moved. So 21, I started going to this different kingdom hall where I really didn't know any of the people, but I hit it off with a lot of with some of the people there. There were people around my age in the congregation. We became friends pretty quickly. One of as you would say, brothers, if you're a witness, um, but one of the guys there who was about the same age as me, he was, a little more, he was obviously involved for a while in the congregation. His parents, he was brought up in it. He started studying with me, um, and which is something that's also I feel like I'm gonna freaking keep explaining too much, but if you're not a witness, you're not familiar with it. Basically, before you get baptized and brought into the organization, somebody has to study with you and make sure that you understand what is being taught. So he studied with me. We became friends, and pretty quickly, the study didn't last long. He was like, you know enough. So I was scheduled to be baptized at the next assembly, which was like that spring. Um, so this was, or yeah, this was, it was summer when I really started going to the meetings and started kind of making new friends in this congregation. He studied with me, and then by that fall, they were like, "You're good to go." So the next opportunity to get baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses was that spring, which was in April of 2011. So, um, so I was baptized in 2011. So after this, so fast forward about 2 years, 2013, the governing body, which was something growing up and being around the organization, which was my point of mentioning all of that in the first place. You never really heard much about the governing body. Like, we knew it was something that existed, but it was just like these. You viewed it as like, so I think of any company, they have a board of directors or whatever, and they're people that make decisions in the company, and you never thought of them as more than that, really. You didn't. I honestly, growing up, I never even knew who they were. I couldn't have told you really one of their names. And it was around 2013 they started JW Broadcasting. And it bothered me a little bit because it was, once JW Broadcasting started, it was all of the governing body members. It was once a month they would put out this broadcast, and it was very much like, if you were going to the meetings and doing everything they wanted you to, it was, you watch the broadcast, and everybody talked about it. Like, as soon as it came out, everybody talked about it. So it was very much, that bothered me because it was the governing body, so it was very much putting themselves out there and kind of, to me, making themselves like celebrities among the community. So that was my first, that I put that in the back of my mind. Like, it bothered me, but I didn't, not enough that I was like, oh, this is wrong. I thought it was wrong, but it wasn't like, um, it wasn't enough to derail me at that point or to leave the JW community. But fast forward, over the years I heard about the CSA. I guess that's how we have to say it if we're putting a video out on YouTube. But there were things that came to light under my own, just stumbling across it in the news, and a relative or two sending me stuff who was kind of out or questioning the organization. But I was like, it's a big 8 million. I think Jehovah's Witness count has been at 8 million for a long time, which isn't a small number. But I was like, it's a pretty big group of people. This stuff is bound to happen. Like, of course that isn't great to hear, and you don't want to be involved with an organization that has that issue. But I was like, well, being this big of a group of people, there's many congregations spread out all over the world. It's bound to happen. And yeah, among any group of people, that kind of stuff is bound to happen. What I didn't understand at the time was how the organization was handling this issue, which I'll get to that in a little bit. But so fast forward to 2020. So COVID was, oh, I can't say that word. So what happened in 2020, spring of 2020, was a big problem for me. No. So what happened in spring of 2020 kind of started to really open my eyes to this organization. At first, nothing crazy happened. We, of course, stopped going to in person meetings and preaching door to door, which wasn't shocking to me based on everything that was happening in the world. So, uh, we went on to Zoom and people did, we would have Zoom service meetings and then people would sit at their computers and write letters while, kind of talking to people in the congregation, whatever your service group was. And, so that was very understandable why that was happening. I had no issue with that. And then jump to summer 2020, businesses started opening up in the area I live in anyway. And so we were, people were starting to, I was back working in my office where I worked secularly, and people that I were friends with were starting to get more comfortable with spending time with people, which, it was a lot of going on hikes. People in the congregation that had an outdoor patio area were inviting people over to do that. And then, of course, as the year progressed and the weather got colder, or if the weather didn't cooperate, there were sometimes gatherings, where you'd be invited to something in the congregation, to people's houses, and you'd be invited, then the weather didn't cooperate or it was too cold, so we would end up inside. And, the people that felt comfortable with that, it was fine. And it was great to be back in person with people and actually, not just seeing people through a computer screen. And so this was the first time that I really got bothered. Was, I think it was around October of 2020. The governing body basically put out a statement, and I don't remember, they were doing updates, like we call them governing body updates, which they still do, I think. But it started in 2020, and it sorry, I'm looking at my computer and it is telling me stuff. But anyway, so they basically came out and said it's not okay for people to be gathering in person. Like, we're still in the middle of I don't know if I can say that word either. We're still in the middle of what we all know happened in 2020. Starts with a P. And they basically said, you shouldn't be having in-person gatherings. Like, nobody in the congregation should be getting together and meeting up in person. And that upset me a lot. That was the first time where I was like, this is like overstepping control, because, like, the local governments in my area were saying it was okay. They were, opening restaurants again to limited capacity. They were, things were just open again, and people were getting together. And of course, after at this point, it had been like 6 months or more of people just completely isolating, which isn't natural. And I'm not going to get into all of that, because I know there's a lot of different opinions on that whole subject, but it was infuriating to me. So that upset me a lot. So that was like my first eye opener, where I was like, what is happening? Like, this organization is overstepping, Like, this should be a personal decision. Well, then go to the next year. So this would have been 2021. I'd have to look up the exact timeline on this to even remember. But they, so that's when the vaccine came out. And what a disaster in the JW community and where I lived, in my opinion. So the vaccine comes out, and the governing body starts talking about it in their updates, um, everything. So a few people that I was very close friends with at the time were elders in the congregation, and so I would get together with friends. So they were getting letters and things before we would even find out stuff, but they would mention it. And I can't tell you how many times I heard the governing body says, the governing body says, the governing body's recommending, the governing body's recommending. And so when the vaccines came out, the governing body, I know there's updates, maybe they're still there. I know they delete stuff all the time. Who knows? But, it was basically, they didn't come right out and say you need to get vaccinated, but it was, you were very strongly encouraged to be vaccinated. And it was, and then updates on what the percentage of Bethel was, which is the world headquarters. Bethel in the Bible is the house of God, I think is what it means. So that's what they call the world headquarters, and then they have branches throughout the world. So those are all Bethel. So if you people serve at Bethel, which is slave labor to go help this organization. But anyway, so I heard this over and over and over again about, the governing body strongly encourages you to be vaccinated, basically. And so a few close friends who I would get together with all the time, we would see each other basically multiple times a week. So we were together the one day, and somebody brought it up, and about I think it was either regarding the vaccinations or or being careful about being in close proximity to one another during what happened in 2020 and into 21 and beyond. But anyway, so I was so tired of hearing it, and I even said it in a joking manner because I had heard the governing body says for the millionth time, and I jokingly said, "Oh, the governing body can't tell me what to do." And I got a visceral reaction from both of them out of that at the moment, but I brushed it off like, oh, whatever. So we went about, we had our day, did what we did. And then it was the next day or a couple days later, both of them ended up messaging me and were like expressed concern over the fact that I said the governing body can't tell me what to do. And I was like, I was joking. Like, I'm kind of exhausted over everything that's going on, and it was just, I don't know, it just rolled off my tongue over the millionth time of hearing about the governing body has decided this. So I guess I was perceived as being a rebellious little not good Jehovah's Witness. You gotta be a good little Jehovah's Witness if you want to be a Jehovah's Witness. So anyway, so fast forward. So during this time, I admittedly did not handle the C word well after 2020 and moving into a few years forward. And yeah, let's get back to this. I have notes just to keep myself on track here. because I didn't want this video to be too long, and it's already almost 20 minutes. So anyway, so without going into too much detail, I'm not going to go into it in this video. I will at a later time. I ended up getting disfellowshipped. Not because of that statement, I will say that. But I did drink too much for a time. That was a coping mechanism, that a very unhealthy coping mechanism that I developed after 2020. And so yeah, 2022 I was disfellowshipped for almost a year. And then let's see. So yeah, so this was a pivotal point in my waking up process. During the last 6 months that I was disfellowshipped, I started really looking into, I finally, for the first time, really gave myself permission to look into the organization. And I found out, I mean, it's typical if you watch any XJWs online, they'll say, I watched the Australian Royal Commission. That was huge for me. Seeing not only how CSA was being handled, which was disgusting, and then seeing Jeffrey Jackson say basically that no, Jehovah's Witnesses aren't God's only spokespeople on earth, was dumbfounding, because that's exactly what they teach. If you're not a Jehovah's Witness, you have no hope. So that was something. And then I researched a bunch of other cases, some here in the United States, and just the story was consistent on how, they meet with the elders. The elders were told to report to the branch, and so the branch is just basically under the governing body, and it was the same story over and over again, where it was basically, they were encouraged to not report to authorities or anything, and it was all to just save themselves, to make the organization look good. It wasn't about helping any of the victims. It was disgusting. And then I just assumed the disfellowshipping arrangement had always been around, even though I was a part of it. Well, because I was disfellowshipped, that's what helped me wake up. But it was then also very disturbing for me to find out that it wasn't until the 1950s that they started the disfellowshipping arrangement. And before then, they even condemned, then it was Catholics and some other religions had, they have a different term for it, like shunning's a common phrase. I can't think of the other one. But I mean, it's basically your friends and family cut you off because you don't agree with them religiously, and that wasn't started until by Jehovah's Witnesses until the 1950s. And before then, they even called it, basically they called it a toxic practice by Catholics and others who would do that. So that was a big part of me then being waking up. But then it took me a couple more years. I got reinstated. And I decided I was going to be a PMO, which, if you don't know, in the JW community, it's physically and mentally out. So you basically go to meetings, do the things, but it's not right. And I was doing it for, to keep my social life up, because that was all the friends I had were Jehovah's Witnesses pretty much. So I did that for a while, and I couldn't do it. Uh, it was, I would sit at meetings, and then even especially, I went to a couple assemblies and one convention after I was reinstated, and I knew that it was wrong. Jehovah's Witnesses were wrong. But I went, and it was so painful to sit through. I was like, I just can't keep doing this. So I decided, well, then I'm gonna fade. And I did that I did that the end of 2024. I faded, and then so it was only April that I officially disassociated. Um, so yeah, the fading. So I wasn't going to meetings or doing anything, but I still had people contacting me and being like, I'd like well-meaning people who were like wanted to truly help me, and people were like, "What's wrong with you? Why haven't you been at meeting?" Just being not nice about me not going to meetings. And so I decided that I was done. So yeah, in April of 2025, I wrote a letter and sent it to elders in my congregation, and just said, I'm done. And I listed some of the reasons why. If I would have tried to list all the reasons why and went into too much detail, I would have had to write a book. So I did a 2-page letter, and I touched on the CSA, the Disfellowshipping, some of the doctrine. The blood issue is a big one for me. After doing more research into that, I realized it doesn't make any sense. 1914 and the overlapping generation. I mean, there's so many doctrines. I could go on and on. The founders, if you look into the founders, Charles Taze Russell. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, Charles Taze Russell and Judge Rutherford, who were like, Russell started it, Rutherford took over. So this was from the late 1800s into the early 1900s. I think Rutherford died in the 1940s, and then it was taken over by Knorr, and then that's when they put into place a governing body. But if you look into those, especially the two guys, the first two I mentioned who started it, I mean, they were not good people at all. Like, there's no accounts of them being good people. The terrible people who started the organization. And Russell started it at a time, so in the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s, there were a lot of new religions being started, branching off from mainstream Christianity. And yeah, I've just, I learned so much that I was like, I'm out. So that's my already too long of a rant about how I woke up. So I hope this video helps somebody, and I definitely intend to make more. And I'll definitely branch off onto other subjects, and kind of tell more about my story, my background, and go into more detail about what I mentioned about the things that woke me up to Jehovah's Witnesses being not the truth, which is what they call themselves. They have the truth. It is a lie. They are brainwashed. It is a cult, and it's sad. It makes me sad. And there's so many people that I love and I miss. I hope at least some of them wake up. I know they probably won't all wake up in my lifetime, but maybe some will. But even if they don't, I hope to make new friends through this community, and help other people who want to wake up or are waking up. So, thank you for listening. Have a good day.